The information featured in this program is general in nature and therefore should not be relied upon. Guests appearing on the program may have commercial arrangements with some of the companies mentioned. Before making any investment, insurance or financial planning decisions, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you.
Hello and welcome to Your Money, Your Call, and welcome to a great night of property information and education. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope that you're getting your questions ready for us to answer. But before we get to that, here's your property news for this week. And Macquarie Group has joined the growing number of banks charging property investors higher interest rates as it faces pressure to curb a rapid expansion in home lending. After a week in which banks have put the brakes on property investor lending, changes that took effect on Friday will mean that Macquarie customers taking out fixed-rate investor or interest-only loans will pay higher rates than borrowers who live in their property. The change was communicated to mortgage brokers this week, following hot on the heels of similar moves from ANZ Bank, NAB and the Commonwealth Bank, which have all scrapped or scaled back discounts offered to investors. The flurry of activity in the booming investor lending market is a response to the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority demanding investor lending growth slow to no more than 10% a year from 10.4% today. And while property prices march forward in Sydney and Melbourne, it is a very different story on the ground in both Perth and the mining towns, where many investment properties now lie empty. Rental yields in mining towns have dropped by as much as 50%, according to the president of the Real Estate Institute of Western Australia, David Airy, with Karratha and Port Hedland amongst the biggest losers. Where once they commanded high rents and high sale prices, the towns are now struggling to attract either. According to Richard Young, CEO of Perth-based Cape Horn Young Estate Agents, the situation is dire in some pockets. He recently heard of a house in Port Hedland that was bought a few years ago for $1.2 million and attracted a bid of $320,000 at an auction recently. He says that these things are cyclical though, and there is a chance that the market will come back to those mining towns, but it may take a while. I've got two of my regular and expert guests in the studio to answer all of your questions tonight. Joining me is Brad Beer from BMT and Damian Collins from Momentum Wealth. Now, if you do have a question for anyone on the panel this evening, give us a call right now on 1300 30 34 35 or email your question to me right now at property@skynews.com.au. Welcome to the program, and let's get started. And welcome to you both.
Margaret, thanks.
Brad, first of all, the news about the investor lending. We're seeing pretty much all of the banks respond with some kind of a measure. They're either stopping the discounts to investors, they're adding interest rates so they have a higher rate to investors, or they're scaling back on the loan to valuation ratios, so not allowing investors to go higher than 80% on the value of the property that they're buying and the ones that they already own. What do you think is happening here?
Well, look, I think the Sydney market is the one that's run the hardest in the country. News Story 2 talks about the Perth market and it's struggling. I mean, if you put some more pressure on investors there, that's probably not necessarily so good. Sydney market did nothing for such a period of time, and then we had some growth and now a little bit of explosive growth, but it tends to run in cycles and will probably slow down soon.
Well, the reality is, if you measure back over the past 10 or 15 years, the average annual growth rate is about 3.4%. That isn't anything fabulous if you've been in the market that long.
So from 03 to 08, 09, we had next to nothing. So the average across that period of time still was 3.4%, as you say. When
everywhere else, in fact, most other capital cities doubled in that period, and Sydney had a 17% growth in that same period.
So we have an explosion of market in one space that everybody kind of cares about a little bit because it makes such an impact, I suppose. And then we react so heavily to try and, I suppose, get some investors out of the market. I look at that Macquarie story, and they said they had 60% growth, I think, in mortgage lending to investors off a small base. So, you know, if you've got not many loans, 10% is not many loans. You've got a big base, 10% is a large amount of loans. I don't... Look, am I a fan of the whole concept? Not necessarily, and I think it's a reaction to one part of an overall Australian market.
Damian, I guess it's, I mean, you would notice that you're from Perth, you have your finger on the pulse of the market there. Over here, everybody just thinks there's an Australia-wide property boom. It's reported as such, and because we have such a large population, everybody thinks that. But, you know, you guys in Perth and Adelaide aren't seeing it, aren't seeing any of it.
No, definitely not, Margaret. We run in different cycles to the Sydney market, particularly. I think 01 to 03, we saw Sydney particularly do really strongly. Perth was flat, but then Perth had a big run up 03 to 07. And as you say, the Perth market is pretty flat. There's not a lot of activity. Sales are down about 11%. And it's all Sydney based. Yeah, Sydney investors, half the loan growth in Sydney is from investors. And you know you're really looking at a bubble when you start to get to that sort of level for a sustained period of time.
But it's not good news for you that the banks are doing this, is it? For people in Perth and the mining towns, because especially in mining towns, which is where the investors buy, you know, the locals don't really buy because most of the people who live there aren't from there, they're working there. So they don't buy, they rent. It's investors who come in and buy. And if there's going to be pressure put on those investors, then the ones who are already in there are in for more pain that they don't need.
Look, a lot of the banks had already cut back their loan-to-value ratios in Port Hedland and Karratha some time ago, just because they were, you know, they could see what was happening there. So most of those you struggle to get 70 or 80% loans now anyway. So a little bit higher on the interest rate, yes, but I don't think it'll have as much effect. Look, certainly we've seen it in our mortgage broking division. Some clients, if you wanted to get 90, 95% loans, you're really going to struggle as an investor. It's going to go back to the old days where you probably need that 20% equity in your own home or a deposit before you can get into the property market.
Brad?
I think also something to be concerned about for some investors. What about all the people that maybe have bought something off the plan with some sort of pre-approval in place? What happens if the LVR reduces or the criteria gets more difficult? And lots of people have probably exchanged something off the plan in the country at the moment that will at some point...
And it has to be reapproved. A lot of off-the-plan buyers don't realise that even if they have an approval in place, it has to be reapproved. And
reapproved, we've got valuation, which if you're in the city market, you probably would be fine. But you've also got the fact of, OK, if they tighten the criteria, they don't take into account as much of the income, will you have enough equity? Will you be able to actually still afford the payments or actually get the loan at that approval process? Because I think a lot of the pre-approvals are not there anymore.
Well, of course, these things aren't well thought through, and I want to come back later if we get some time and just discuss the matter a little more in depth. But for now, let's go to the phones. And Robert from Sydney, welcome to the program, Robert.
Oh, thank you very much. Look, I'm considering buying a two-bedroom unit in Sydney's inner west in the next couple of months, and I'd just like some advice from the team as to what they feel about Sydney's inner west markets area, inner west market like Stanmore, Lewisham and Dulwich Hill, etc.
Is this for an investment, Robert, or to live in?
No, investment.
Okay. Brad, Stanmore, inner west,
well,
Summerhill, around those areas.
Look, do I fundamentally have an issue with those areas normally? And I'd say no, but we've had a lot of growth where we've got a situation where the city market has run pretty hard, as we're just discussing, and we generally run in some sort of cycle. If the prices go too high, the investors, well, they may not be able to borrow money as easy to start with, but less investors in the market means a little bit less pressure on the market. So do we still have the continual boom, or whether it's boom, the continual growth that we've been having at the moment? You'd expect not as fast. So then would you look for something with more growth at the moment? The price to get in is going to be high, the yields are low, interest rates are low, but interest rates are low all over the country, not just in Sydney.
Damian, putting aside emotion altogether and thinking as an investor should, which is, where is my most opportune market at this moment in time? I wouldn't have said it was anywhere in Sydney.
Oh, definitely not, Margaret. I think Robert will be lining up with a lot of other people. I saw one over the weekend that sold $500 million out in Sydney in 5 or 6 hours. So it's just that sort of really frothy end of the market, and I just don't think Robert's going to see the returns. The yields just don't really stack up. If you could get a 5 or 6% yield, but I really doubt it, it might be worth looking at for cash flow. But I just think the Sydney market's cooked, and it might be same prices in 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, look, Robert, when we buy an investment property, the aim is to get in in before anyone else does, not after most people are already in, because you need two things and you need them immediately after you buy. First of all, you need a sufficient yield to be able to at least almost cover your costs, so you're not continuously putting money in out of your own pocket. If you have to do that, if you have to supplement the rent in order just to pay the outgoings, and don't forget on a unit you also have all of those body corporate fees to also pay, which tends to make the expenses a little more on a unit. If we have to keep doing that, we need the property to grow better than normal average market growth. And I can't see that happening in Sydney. It's simply not sustainable. And if you do the math, we might have a lot of people who live here in Sydney, but sooner or later the properties are going to go out of the price range of the average income earner, and there won't be the people left on the ground to buy them. And the second thing you want to happen in your property is, of course, you want it to grow in value, because you need your money to perform better than it can perform elsewhere in the share market or in some managed funds. If you're only going to get a total yield of around about 5 or 6% a year, then it's not worth putting your money there. You need to be looking for an area that may grow by at least 5% a year, hopefully 10, and one that will give you about 5% a year in yield, and then you're talking about an investment that's been worth the risk. I just think that if you buy in Sydney right now, it may go up a little more, but I think it's an opportunity cost of buying somewhere else where it hasn't taken off yet, but it's got a lot of good fundamentals. We talk every week on this show about Brisbane, and it's certainly stacking up to be a really great place for property investors to buy. Well, John wrote this week with a concern about insurance, and he asks, "Hi Margaret, we often hear the insurance industry warning us about underinsurance, but every time I use one of their online calculators to determine rebuilding costs, it spits out ridiculous numbers. Latest was $440,000 recommended sum insured for a property in Ipswich worth only $260,000. Isn't using their calculators a bit like asking the bank how much they think you should pay in fees? A higher sum insured equals higher premiums for them. How do we get independent guidance on rebuild costs and sums insured?" Damian, I think a lot of people, though, to be fair to the insurance company, completely underestimate a rebuild cost.
Absolutely.
You know, just because a property is worth 260 doesn't mean that to rebuild something there will cost the land value less that value and then whatever's left over.
Yeah.
You've got demolition if you have to rebuild, which can be, you know, 30, 40, 50,000 removal of debris. All the costs that you've got to pay to live somewhere while it's being built,
Yeah.
it can stack up.
Well, definitely. Look, I've looked at those online calculators, and why they do seem high, as you say, there's demolition costs, your cost to live elsewhere. There's a whole raft of things that goes into it. And look, the extra, you know, 40 or 50,000 insurance probably isn't that significant. But the biggest problem is, people are far more uninsured than underinsured. That's where the problem really lies. And people think, oh, if something happens to my property, I'll only insure it for half of what it's worth. But the insurers call that co-insurance. And so, look, I'd rather be a little bit over than a little bit under.
Do you want to just explain very quickly what co-insurance means?
Yeah, so basically what that means is when you're insuring a property, let's say it's worth $400,000, if you insure it for $200,000, the insurance company figures, well, you've self-insured for the other half.
So basically they'll only pay half.
So if you have a claim, they'll only pay half the claim. Now, if you're close to around the mark, they're probably not going to quibble about it, plus or minus 15%, I would imagine. But if you're really quite significantly underinsured, they're likely to say something. So again, the extra premium is probably not that significant. A lot of your premiums are around burglary and other stuff that probably are not impacted as much by the value of the property. So I would say better to be a little bit cautious and over-insure.
I agree, Brad. You're a quantity surveyor and you know how much these things cost. And I wouldn't have thought that $440,000 for a $260,000 value property in Ipswich was really that much too much.
The fact is, as you're saying, both saying there, is this. It's not just about rebuilding the actual house sometimes, it's removal of debris. You have to build it under today's laws. So value and construction costs are often two very different things, because you can't go and rebuild some of the properties that are there because they're not up to current standards. You've got to bring it up to current standards. What if it's full of asbestos? You might have hazardous materials.
And it probably is in Ipswich.
That's right, hazardous materials to remove. Now, the actual premium change in your insurance policy based on a higher construction cost, it's not like if you add another $100,000, you double your premium, because there's a whole lot of factors in your insurance premium, and construction cost is one of them. You're best off to be a little bit over, not ridiculous, but a little bit over, and a lot of people just don't realise that there's actually other things, that it's not just rebuilding that house, and that's the big problem we have.
So are you saying trust the online calculators because they're normally fairly accurate? They're not just designed to boost up premiums, are they?
Well, you see, we've actually built one, and so we've made it what we believe it's called Rep Cost. It's an app that is a calculator. Now, we're not a vested interest because we're not the insurance company.
Oh, there you go. So go to BMT.
And we've actually got one there.
There's your answer. Go along to the BMT website. They have a calculator there, and you can check that with the one you've done on the insurance company and work out exactly what you should be paying to rebuild the property. Thank you for tuning in tonight. If you're new to the program, you should know that every Monday night we choose one question from either the emails or the calls, and we send a copy of one of my books. This week, the winning question will receive the 20 must-ask questions for every property investor. It's a must-have if you're ready to buy. Call us now on 1300 30 34 35 or email property@skynews.com.au with a question, and then make sure you watch at the end of the show to find out if you're the lucky viewer. Don't go anywhere while we head off for a short break. We'll be back very soon. Don't go away. Good to have your company tonight on Your Money, Your Call. I'm joined by Brad Beer from BMT and Damian Collins from Momentum Wealth, and we're here to make sure that you get all the answers that you need. If you do have a question, grab the phone and call us on 1300 30 34 35, or of course you can email us on property@skynews.com.au. Remember, you could win my book, The 20 Must-Ask Questions for Every Property Investor. Artie, you're on the phone. Welcome to the program.
Hi, how are you doing?
Now, what's your question for us tonight, Artie?
Yeah, two parts. First is, what's your view on Western Melbourne, inner Western Melbourne, suburbs called Truganina?
Yes.
And the second part of the question is the growth in prices we've seen recently. It's attributed to the overseas funds, from China and India and all that. So I'm just wondering, is that? I've been told that that's just very little at the moment. There's a lot more money coming from overseas. So actually the prices are under, it's not really the right price, so you can go up even much higher. So what's your view on that?
Okay, so Truganina in the inner west there, we've got a lot happening with the rail hub in Sunshine being completed there, or almost completed. It might be already completed. So there's a lot of attention around Sunshine. Of course, Altona and Altona North, which is closer to the coast, they've done really well, surprisingly, for many people. Damian, what do you think of Truganina?
Arthur, I know a few people who bought it there in 2008 in one of those new estates, and they didn't do particularly well for quite a long period of time. It's certainly more established now, but look, it's not an area I'd particularly be fond of. I think you could do better in perhaps the east side of town. But look, Melbourne again is, particularly in our eastern suburbs, well overheated. The outer suburbs not quite as much, but I think you'd be better off. You're from Sydney, maybe if you're looking interstate, maybe have a look up towards Brisbane. That's probably the market's going to do best at the moment. In terms of overseas money, look, there's no doubt there's a lot of foreign money, but a lot of the foreign investors can only buy generally brand new unless they live here or have a permanent residency. So
especially now with the new rules for foreign investors, they're really cracking down on them at the moment and making sure that they can't buy those established properties. And Truganina, as you say, did have a lot of brand new homes there, but there's not as many coming on now, so it's more existing supply. So yeah, good, Brad.
Look, from what you say there, some near new homes, and it is a little more established, and the slightly more coastal areas had some decent growth, would probably suggest that the difference between those two might mean that it's probably not such a bad thing. The near new houses, they still get quite good depreciation, not much less than new, and therefore the numbers will probably stack, which is only part of the decision, of course, but they're not like there's nothing or only a little bit. And had the expansion already, I suppose, and then now it's infill and people that are living there, I suppose, is a positive. Overseas money coming in, it's always been coming, but they're stamping on it pretty hard, in my opinion, to make sure it's not being done, making you resell if you shouldn't have bought, and they can only buy new stock.
Yeah, look, Artie, I'm actually an eastern girl myself in Melbourne at the moment as well. I think the eastern suburbs, but a little bit further out, are the places to be. We haven't seen as much growth there, and I think there's plenty coming. But I'm with Damian on this one. I definitely think Brisbane has better chance than Truganina. So why don't you start having a look around there as well? Pamela, how are you going, Pamela? You're from Melbourne?
Yes.
And you're looking to invest in Melbourne as well, I believe.
Yes, we're looking more like at the between Melton or Diggers Rest, first investment property.
Okay. Brad, the thing about Melton is that Melton years ago I kind of picked as a good place to invest, and then unbeknownst to everyone and quite randomly, the local council was given 7,000 extra hectares of land, and they put 4,000 of it out to residential development, and suddenly the pressure that was being played upon the existing housing was very diluted out into that new housing. Are you familiar with the area?
Not highly familiar. I know I've seen a lot of jobs come through there, but so much supply, I suppose, is what that says to me. And I guess the other part of your question, you're buying in Melbourne because you live in Melbourne. I was having the same discussion with someone I know quite well yesterday about, do you just need to buy exactly where you are? And sometimes, you know, the excuses that we use for that, I've been guilty, are sometimes about adding value as well, which has been sometimes my reason. But being close to it, being able to watch it, you don't really want to drive past it and watch it anyway. So therefore, looking wider is not as hard as it sounds sometimes.
Absolutely. Damian, Melton, certainly on a rail line, so it's an easy commute back into Melbourne. Identified in the 2030 plan, which has been replaced by the Melbourne something or other plan, but identified in the 2030 plan as a transport hub. And it certainly does get that, especially if they do that ring road going from the port right up into the northern suburbs there, it's going to go certainly past Melton and create, you know, quite a lot of focus on Melton. What do you think?
It already comes back to how much supply is left. It's got some good things going for it. Look, I remember growing up, Diggers Rest actually was a place where the diggers used to rest. Did you live in Diggers Rest? No, I didn't. I lived on the eastern side, but I remember we'd go on trips in country Victoria. You'd stop there. It was a long, long way out. So it is obviously suburban has sprawled out there. And but again, you'd want to be looking at the supply. So if there's still a lot of estates around there, which I feel there probably is, particularly around Diggers Rest, well, why is your prices going to go up if there's lots more supply to meet that demand? We want to buy in areas where there's good demand. Perhaps the market's undervalued it, but there's that supply constraint is there. That's what you get price growth. So I'd have a good look. If there's still a lot of land subdivisions out there, I wouldn't be buying out there.
Yeah, I think the point too is that at the moment we're seeing that growth on the other side and closer to Melbourne. So we're seeing the focus shift from a lot of the inner Melbourne stuff, because I think everyone has accepted that that is going to be an oversupply for some time to come. You know, it's still getting pushed along, but that's mostly by the foreign buyers. And for all the reasons you said earlier, the fact that they can only buy new, so they are focusing on those apartments. They're going up and they're going up and they're going up. And I think for an ordinary everyday investor, they need to steer clear of them, of those apartments. We've already seen people buying in Docklands and South Bank, finding that their money's just going nowhere, and in fact it's worth less once they settle. And so therefore the attention's just gone between the CBD and all the way out to Melton into that inner part where we've got Sunshine and to a lesser extent Truganina. We're probably going to get a better result by investing there if we have to invest in Victoria as well. I'm with the boys though, Pamela. I think you need to look outside of Victoria altogether at the moment, unless you're prepared to go probably out east. You are going to get better opportunities in some other areas. Even the central coast of New South Wales and maybe the south coast will probably do better than some of those areas in Melbourne, and certainly the areas in and around Brisbane, and we're talking suburban Brisbane. Well, this is Your Money, Your Call, and it's time for another quick break. We will be back very soon. And while we're gone, you can call in your question by phoning 1300 30 34 35 or emailing us on property@skynews.com.au. Don't go away, because we'll be right back. Welcome back, and thanks for staying with us. I'm Margaret Lomas, and with me tonight is Brad Beer from BMT and Damian Collins from Momentum Wealth. We've got plenty of time left for more questions. Just dial 1300 30 34 35 or email us on property@skynews.com.au. Remember that if we answer your question tonight, you might be selected to receive my book, The 20 Must-Ask Questions for Every Property Investor. Gary, you're on the line from Sydney. How can we help you?
Good evening, Margaret. Looking at an apartment apartment on Macquarie Links, which is a gated community on a golf course estate. And there are 20 apartments on the block, and all the land is now gone.
Yes.
Asking price is $505,000, and it's 3, 2 and 2. Very well built in 2005. The levies are quite high because there's one lift per 5 apartments, and the levies on the lift obviously are fairly high, and that's $7,000 per annum. Just wanting an opinion. Very good access to the M5 and the M7.
Yes.
And just wanting an opinion.
Gary, is this to live in?
It's an investment property.
Okay. Brad, it's not actually a bad buy-in price for Macquarie and for Macquarie Links, especially given that he's actually getting a 3-2. I would have expected him to be only getting a 2-2 for that price. What do you think of the area?
Look, not a bad buying price, as you say. It's 10 years old, so not brand new. And not that brand new is necessarily the wrong decision, but golf course estates, sometimes I suppose they're heavily sold to start with, I suppose, and then everyone gets all excited about golf, and then reality kind of has to set into the golfing estate, I suppose. And I'm not a regular golfer either, but at those sort of prices, at that sort of age, you're still going to get some good depreciation numbers. Your levies are high. Now that's because you've got a lift per floor, you get better depreciation, you've got to pay for it. Do you get enough return out of that to really, I suppose, justify those high levies, I guess, is a problem, because they're always going to be there.
Damian, in my experience, golf course estates typically don't go as well as people think they're going to go. No. We've got them all over Australia, and they're often a little hard to move, aren't they?
Yeah. And I'd suggest, Margaret, you might want to go back and have a look at the price that was originally paid in 2005. My gut feel is that he's probably seen not a huge amount of capital growth for good reason.
And there should be, because it's in Sydney.
Yeah. So. And for $505,000, yeah, it seems cheap, but look, golf course investments, people generally don't want to rent there. It's someone who's potentially 65, retired, scaling down to something smaller where they can play golf to their heart's content. So I'm not sure you're going to get a huge rental demand in that sort of estate. Plus you're looking at high fees, as was mentioned. So look, from an investment, if it's lifestyle, if that's what you want to do and retire, great. But from an investment point of view, I wouldn't be buying in golf course estates.
Yeah, I tend to agree, Gary. I think the reason I asked whether you were buying it to live in is because if you were, I would say, you know, nice buy, nice lifestyle choice, and a lot of people really enjoy living in the golf course estates. But my experience with them as a property investment advisor is that generally they don't fare well, and I'd be very interested to see what these sold for originally and the kind of condition they're in now. If you're looking for a good cash flow investment to help you build a nice strong portfolio, I would suggest that there's probably better properties to buy, and buying this one could be an opportunity cost of buying somewhere that's going to give you not only a better return in the short term, but better growth in the short term as well. Let's go and see an email from Megan. Now, Megan wrote to us and said, "Hi panel, I watch your show religiously. My husband and I have a principal place of residence and an investment property. We've just turned 30 and we have a young child. We'd like to purchase another investment property soon. However, I'm on maternity leave, so I've been told very briefly by a mortgage broker that my wage won't be considered until I'm back at work, so serviceability will be a real issue. You always say viewers should get good financial advice, but I don't know where to look. Any advice? I don't want to give up on further investment just because we've started a family." Of course, Damian, the mortgage broker's right. She's probably not going to be able to service a loan at the moment, but it's probably a good time for her to use this time to get a bit more educated and to start looking around for someone to help her with a proper strategy.
Yeah. Look, Megan, you certainly should be looking to talk to a property investment advisor, someone who knows more than just about finance, who's qualified, a QPIA, someone from the Property Investment Professionals of Australia. I'd recommend you go to that website. Look, we've been able to recently, with some of the banks on maternity leave, they're getting a little bit easier, so it's not completely out of the question. What we've found is that if you've got a letter stating that you're going back to work from your employer, and yourself that you're stating you're going back to work, and you've got enough savings to make up for that shortfall during that period of time you're on maternity leave, we've been able to get some of those loans through. Now, obviously, you don't want to put yourself in a financial predicament where it's going to be tight, so have a good look at that before you do, but I'd suggest you get your broker to have a better look into it, or someone who knows a bit more about that. But there might be some options, but again, you don't want to put yourself in financial difficulty.
Brad, it's good to have a strategy in place before you get started as well.
And I think Absolutely, a strategy on where you're going. Congratulations, firstly, Megan, on actually buying your principal place of residence and then investing in property and looking for a second one. I think the serviceability being issue is something that, well, you're going to have to make the payments. So really, you don't want to borrow money that you can't afford to pay back at whatever time. Part of that plan needs to realise the fact that you're probably going to have children and need to look after them at some point. And what that may mean is that you might have to look at different property that actually returns a little bit better, has better cash flow, and then you don't actually need quite as much money to actually prop up that loan on the way through.
Some good advice there for you, Megan. Megan, I think it's a good time for you to sit back and start to think about becoming more educated about investing in property. In my experience of all of the people who come to my company for help, the ones who are in trouble or who have a portfolio that isn't performing as well as they would like or think that property investing doesn't work, they're normally the ones who started becoming a property investor by leaping into an investment property without really getting professional advice and without becoming more educated. So perhaps do a really good course, read a lot of great books, and as Damian says, go to the Property Investment Professionals of Australia website, which is pippa.asn.au, and make sure that to get guidance, you get someone who is a qualified property investment advisor. At least then you'll know that they've done some kind of a qualification and they most likely know what they're talking about. And they're also being watched by a really great not-for-profit association who's just trying to raise the standards in property investment advising and make sure that all of their members comply with a set of rules that are really, really good for the consumer. Rhonda, you're from Barrel. How are you going?
Too bad. Thank you very much for allowing my call to come through.
You're welcome.
I'd like your opinion on the Southern Highlands, especially Barrel. I'm looking for an investment here, land and house.
Yes.
What do you think? Is there any growth left, or is it only for families, tradespeople and retirees? And there are 8 golf courses here, by the way.
I know that. In fact, you'd be interested to know, Rhonda, that I was in your part of town on Saturday and I was doing a town spotlight for property success. And that's in an upcoming episode. That episode will be around about September, I believe, will be the air date for that. So we went down checking out the area, went to Kiama as well, Shell Harbour and Wollongong while we were there, and went into Barrel. Brad, what do you think about Barrel? I mean, we all know that's where the great Don Bradman came from, and I've got plenty of footage of the Don Bradman Museum and the Oval and all the stuff you've got to get footage of.
Well, that's great, but I think with Barrel, 8 golf courses.
It speaks for itself.
A little. It speaks of, and I look at the last caller and think that the buying in the golf course estate is probably impacted on by where you'd like to go on holidays. Where we go on holidays is not necessarily always the best place to invest. Now, if you're from Barrel, that's not your reason, but you think it's a beautiful spot and a beautiful area, it's not a great reason necessarily to invest in there. Saying that, with the city market going so hard, often what happens is that these areas tend to have some movement, some growth and some good performance, but they also hurt first because people can't afford the golf house anymore or the weekender that they bought really for holidays, not making an investment decision, making a future I love this area decision instead sometimes.
Have you ever been to Barrel, Damian?
No, Margaret, I haven't, but what you said there makes me want to go.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Absolutely
in fact,
beautiful.
You know, one of the things that we kept saying, we had the camera out, there was just so much to take pictures of, and we kept saying, oh, this is so pretty, it's beautiful, and there's that many gorgeous character houses. But the feeling that you get when you're there, and although there are some families there, is that it does have an older than average population, and of course 8 golf courses, that would explain it.
Yeah.
If there's enough people in a small town to play golf at 8 different golf courses, there must be a lot of golf being played. If there's a lot of golf being played, there's not much work being done.
Exactly, and that's always the problem I've had with retirement type areas. It's great for people who live there and retire, but where's the income coming from for these people to move in? What's the industries that are going to sustain high-paying jobs out that way? And don't know a lot about Barrel other than that where generally where it's located. But I'd be looking at industries. What's going to sustain it? Are they high-paying jobs? And if they're not, well, then I can't see that that's location long-term is going to perform well. As Brad said, look, when people in Sydney, particularly, they start feeling wealthier. The holiday homes and the second homes start to come in. Same happens in Melbourne and the Mornington Peninsula and on the other side as well. But I guess, as Brad said, it's exactly that. As soon as it's time to get tough, the holiday house is the first thing to go. So they're not great investments, holiday regions for me.
No, they're absolutely not. And even though Barrel is in with easy reach of Sydney, it's just that little bit far away for someone to reasonably commute, although people do, but the greater proportion of the population certainly don't. You live in Barrel at the moment, and you would know that the prices there are fairly expensive, really, relatively speaking, and that's because they're all such beautiful properties and people do retire there and they tend to spend what they need to there. But I can't see a lot of room in that market anymore, or not a lot of room, and even if it cops a bit of that leftover heat from the Sydney market, I'm not actually picking Barrel to do an awful lot in the coming couple of years. I'm not saying it's going to lose value. It's just not going to get the kind of growth that you want to see from an investment property. And let me reiterate to all of our viewers, it's just not good enough to buy a property that just does okay or doesn't lose value. You need your investment to outperform anything else that your money could be buying at that moment in time. And I think a buy in Barrel might even grow a little. But do I think it'll outperform? I don't think it will, and I think there are many areas that will definitely outperform that you should be thinking about if you truly want to invest in successful property for the future. Well, we're about 3/4 of the way through the program, but you might still be able to get your question answered if you hurry along to the phone while we go off for our last break. Now, call us on 1300 30 34 35 or email us on property@skynews.com.au. We'll see you soon. Welcome back. It's been a great night with Brad Peer from BMT and Damian Collins from Momentum Wealth answering your calls. Our lines are now closed, but during the week you can email your questions for next week to property@skynews.com.au. Now, we just have time for a last couple of questions here. We're going to start with Mike from Perth. Welcome to the program, Mike.
Thanks, guys, for taking my call. I know, Margaret, you've been saying a lot of good stuff about Brisbane, but I just want to ask the panel's opinion in regards to Everton Park. I bought a townhouse, actually off the plan. It will be settled around October, around this year. So I just want to know the views from the panel in regards to that sort of area.
Yes. You know, there's a lot of townhouses being built all around that area. So they are the kind of property that is in demand, but there are a lot of them. Damien, what do you think?
Yeah, Mike, I've had a good look around up around Chermside and under, and we do like those areas up through north of Brisbane there, but we don't buy townhouses for that very reason that Margaret mentioned. A lot of supply of them, and yes, there's certainly demand, but there's, to my opinion, too much supply. A lot of them are in pretty ordinary complexes that were built, pretty averagely. So, look, you've bought it now. It's good to ask the question, but it's too late, Mike. Look, the good news is that Brisbane market's going to likely perform the best in the capital cities around Australia for the next couple of years. So that's a good upside, and you're going to get some good depreciation, and it's brand new. So hopefully your rental yield's strong, and I think it'll be an okay investment, but just watch out for the longer term supply in that area.
Brad, good news for Mike is that on a townhouse you also get a little bit of common property as well to depreciate, which ups your claims.
Absolutely. Common areas you'll own your piece of, so you get decent depreciation based on that, and brand new still does get the most depreciation. I guess settling in October means you've probably bought it a little while ago, not just now. So
hopefully got a lower price.
Hopefully with a little bit of movement in that market, you've got a little bit of a lower price, and even if there's a little bit of oversupply, I suppose, then as long as there's not too much over the long term, given the overall area is not too bad, hopefully it'll do all right for you.
Yeah, look, I think the whole area is going to go okay. If I was to pick the area that's my favourite in Brisbane, it wouldn't be Everton Park or even Nundaroo and Chermside. But that doesn't mean they're bad areas. It means that they will still grow. I just don't think they'll have the hottest growth in Brisbane. They're just a little bit outside of all of that CBD building where there's a lot of units going up, but then we're seeing a lot of townhouses in that band where you are, and I think it's an area where there are a lot of families who probably are going to demand those houses. But as the panel has said, it's not a bad investment. I think it'll go okay for you, and you will get all those great depreciation claims along the way. John from Sydney, how can we help you, John?
Margaret, I understand that you're a big Brisbane fan. If we can cut to the chase a little bit and give us a bit of a tip as to where and why in Brisbane if you were going to spend about 500 to 600k.
Okay. First of all, I'm going to qualify all of this by saying that you should never use an amount of money you've got available to choose an area. So if you said, I've got 600k, where should I buy? That might actually make you buy in an area that's not the best area to buy in. You agree, Damian?
Exactly. So I wouldn't let that determine your total strategy there, in that case particularly there, John. But look, I do like Chermside. Margaret says she thinks there's some better areas, but look, I do like it. It's one of those strategic metropolitan areas that in the Brisbane's plan for the long term. Also, Nunda is another area. It's in that sort of 8 to 12 kilometre bracket that we like. We don't like buying right in the city. We don't like buying in the hot suburbs that everyone knows are popular. We like to buy in those areas that we can still get properties in that 450 to 650 odd range that are likely to be re-rated by the market as the wealth of the city grows. So, do like that sort of area. Mount Gravat's okay, but look, yeah, there's some good opportunities in Brisbane. Just do your homework.
What do you think? Quickly, Brad.
I think like you say, the Mount Gravats, maybe even a bit further south, back towards Logan, you could probably nearly get 2 for that price, and you don't have to put all the money in the same place. Brisbane hasn't had probably the same level of growth that Sydney has, and probably gets out of whack with where it should be in comparison to Sydney's prices. So people eventually, when we become too expensive here, look at other places to invest. A little bit more, and Brisbane's probably on the radar then.
Look, I'm an Eden's Landing and Upper Mount Gravatt fan at the moment. I also don't mind Forest Lake, but stay away from the townhouses there. There are a couple of areas that aren't getting quite as much attention as the Logan Shire. I do like the Logan Shire still, and you can probably pick up 2 there, but I wouldn't. If I bought in Logan, I'd buy 1 there and probably 1 up in Deception Bay. So you've got 2 different kinds of markets at the same time. I wouldn't spend the 600 in one place in Brisbane right now, however. I probably wouldn't even spend 500 right now. I'd go for maybe the 400 to 450 band, or even that 300,000 band and get 2, because that way you're going to get your finger in 2 different pies, and both of those pies should go very well. This week, Matt has a question about something a little different, and he asks, hey Margaret, I'm just thinking outside the square, and I'm wondering about opportunities and risks associated with investing into US real estate. The appeal is obvious, but I'm just wondering what to be aware of in terms of capital growth, risks, fees, investing outside of the country, etc. Brad, the US.
The US, there was, at every property show for some time, there was heaps of guys selling lots of...
What guys?
Guys and girls. People selling and flogging US property when it was really, really cheap. I think, depending on the area, probably not massive amounts of growth unless you pick the right one. It's a big country. We don't know much about it. It's a long way away. There's a lot of problems with property management and getting it done properly. You've got loans in the US as opposed to Australia. You've got to bring your money back. It's got a lot of things associated with it that just make it a lot harder than investing in Australia, where we're from, where we understand a little bit better. And unless you really want to diversify out of this country because you've got that much here, then we've probably got lots of opportunity here, which I'd probably look at first.
Do you know the depreciation laws in America?
Not in a whole lot of detail, but it differs in different states actually. So and Canada differs again.
Oh wow, yeah, I know it's different all over the world. Damien, you've got to ask the question why they've come all this way down under to sell us property.
Because they can't find any suckers in their own country,
Margaret. If it was that good, I mean, you know, all due respect to the Americans, but they'd buy it if it was good, wouldn't they?
Of course. And that's the difficulty. When you're buying property, I mean, you've got one asset in another country, you're choosing the cities. I mean, Detroit was pushed around. Now, I wouldn't send my worst enemy to Detroit. It's going backwards in a big way. They were selling stock that they couldn't sell locally, and still that reason is that they're trying to sell properties, albeit there's not as many promoters of it as there was, Matt. So, look, as Brad said, unless you've got this massive portfolio in Australia, I wouldn't be looking overseas at all. There's a lot of risk. What happens if you get a bad property manager? You know, what happens if tenant wrecks the place? Who's going to look after all those things? So I'd steer clear.
And, you know, speaking of bad property managers, my understanding of the American market is that bad property managers is something that you do get a lot of. Property management isn't anywhere near as well developed as it is here in the country.
Nowhere near as good.
Yeah, and people have all sorts of problems with that whole possession is 9/10 of the law thingo, where someone gets in and they'll squat in your house and you can't get them out. And also, in many states, back taxes attached to the property. And so you might buy the property for $50,000 and it might have $50,000 or $100,000 worth of back. They call them property taxes, but they're like council rates that haven't been paid, and they become your responsibility. It's very difficult to uncover all of that information.
And if you're an expert at the American property market across the whole country, then maybe a thing to consider after you've bought a whole lot here. But as your first or early investments, it's a minefield.
Yeah, it's speculative, isn't it? Look, Matt, I knew someone once who was offered a property in Florida for $20,000, and he figured that since he could put that on his credit card, he'd give it a go. And I think it was worth $10,000 a year later, but that's not what I call a big risk. I know someone else who was sold a property in Detroit, and she was told that because it was great because it was in the inner city, and anyone from Detroit will tell you don't go anywhere near the inner city because that's where all the gangs are, and she paid $250,000 for that, and at the time the property was probably worth about $25,000, and the intermediary pocketed all the rest of the money, and it's like a sucker born every day. I just think you've got to be very careful. It's hard enough to invest here in Australia and to work out where to buy and when to buy and which markets are going to take off next. It's impossible to work that out in an overseas country that you know nothing about, and you're relying on the people selling you the property to give you the right kind of information, and they're not going to do that because it's in their best interest to see you walk away with the property and they walk away with your funds. Just stick to Australia where you have more surety and certainly, as Brad says, plenty of opportunity left in this market. Well, that brings us to the end of this week's show. I will be back next week, and joining me then will be Curtis Field from Collier's, and you can send any questions to me through the week to put to Curtis when he comes on the show next week. Thank you to my guests this week, Brad Beer from BMT and Damian Collins from Momentum Wealth. As always, their advice is spot on. Thanks to all of our callers. Now, our prize for the question of the week this week goes to Gary. You're about to buy in a golf course estate, and we thought it would be great for you to read the 20 must-ask questions so you can then ask them of that golf course estate and work out whether it stacks up, and that way you'll know whether or not it is an area for you to buy in. If you could now email me on yourmoneyyourcall@destiny.com.au, yourmoneyyourcall, all one word, at destiny.com.au. It's not there on the bottom of your screen, but I'm sure you remember that. I'll send you your book, The 20 Must-Ask Questions for Every Property Investor. Now, of course, that prize is only for our winner, but if you'd like to get hold of any of my books, go to my website, destiny.com.au, and go to my online store. You can follow me on Twitter, Margaret Lomas AU, and if you visit YouTube and type in Channel Destiny, you can watch some great video there, and while you're there, make sure you subscribe. At the moment, my 20 must-ask questions are all being screened there. Enjoy your week, and be sure to tune in to the Business Channel on Saturdays for the brand new season of Property Success. It's a great educational half hour. Thanks for being with us. I'll see you again next week.
The information featured in this program is general in nature and therefore should not be relied upon. Guests appearing on the program may have commercial arrangements with some of the companies mentioned. Before making any investment, insurance or financial planning decisions, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you.